Fans are about to see a more NFL-style model be introduced into the NBA. And what I mean by that, of course, for those of you who watch the NFL, you already know there's nobody bigger than the program. Any superstar that sort of acts up, is too expensive, is always injured, they're quick to not only be cast-offs, but also most other teams do not show interest. We can tie these things into the NBA this season. There was no interest for Trae Young, LaMelo Ball when they hit the trade block, and also Anthony Davis. But this is only the beginning. We got Jimmy Butler almost holding out during the regular season in his last year in Miami. Keep that in mind. But once again, that NFL-style model is slowly creeping into the NBA. But let's listen to James Dolan as he elaborates, not wanting to go over the second apron.
So based on individual contracts, that while the core will be the core, do you think there's a chance that we have 2, 3, 4 player turnover or no?
First off, most of our guys are on a contract.
Right.
We have a couple guys who are not. If we could bring back the whole team, right, exactly as it is, I think why wouldn't you, right? But I don't know if we're going to be able to.
Just contractually.
Just contractually.
And some guys
right?
are going to get bigger paydays, and good for them.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, we're willing to stretch, right? But there's certain things in the NBA that you have to be, suicidal to do, and we're not going to do those.
Right.
One of them is called the second apron. Cannot go into the second apron.
Got it.
But but that's up to Leon, right?
He's making all the decisions. You're just stroking checks, right?
Yeah, I'm just telling him how big of a check I can write, right? I'll write as big of a check as possible, but I can't write a check that goes into the second apron.
Got it.
Now, once again, this serves as a nice backdrop as you hear an owner who has always been comfortable going over the luxury tax, and that's because the local TV market for New York has been very lucrative for James Dolan. But now, because of this new media landscape, things have changed. Look at the words he used. Going over the second apron is suicidal. The league today, the way it's structurally set up, if you actually dip into the apron one time, you could end up being stuck there over and over. And the reason is because if you give the wrong star a crazy contract and all of a sudden they become unavailable, it's almost a death sentence because that star is completely untradeable. A prime example of this is Trae Young. Look how he went to the Washington Wizards basically for free. Anthony Davis also hit the trade block. There was very little suitors. Same thing for another player who's also very injury prone in Ja Morant. So now we're going to hear from Mark Cuban elaborate on how the business has changed. He gives great insight to the relationship these new owners are having with their teams, especially coming in with a lot of private equity and Saudi money. I'm going to point out once again that Saudi money, especially from the new Lakers owner, is eventually over time going to have fans realize, hey, Luka's been here for 2 or 3 seasons. Why they're not in a rush to put some championship pieces around him? Again, things are shifting, and Mark Cuban also elaborates on the true business model the NBA is in under streaming. And it's not ratings, but you guys check it out, and every once in a while, I'll check in.
I can't afford an NFL team, and I wouldn't want to do it where, you bring in 50 different, it's kind of like my buddy, well, I don't want to name names, but when you bring in a lot of private equity, when the Mavs, I used to always say that, okay, I'll absorb the losses because winning was more important. But when you have a bunch of investors, you can't do that. It's not all your money. Steve Ballmer can do it, right? The Pacers can do it however they want to do it. But if you have investors, they give you enough money so you can pay $4, $6, $8 billion so that you can, have to put in another 100 million or 200 million every year.
And that 100 million, 200 million every year that Mark Cuban is referring to is the luxury tax payments going into the second apron. The quiet part that's not being said out loud is the fact that this was a situation that was facing the Mavericks once the brand new owners came in, because Luka's extension was coming up, and also Kyrie Irving and others. But at the same time, the number that they would have re-signed Luka at would have been close to 70 million a year. So just that number alone already puts them close to that second apron. Matter of fact, it puts them well above the second apron, because even before that extension, the Mavericks were already paying about $5 million into the luxury tax. So some Dallas Mavericks fans, they might be already aware, but a lot of the issues about sending Luka quickly to LA almost for nothing really came over those numbers, just paying deep into the luxury tax year in, year out, while at the same time, they don't necessarily have the personnel inside the building that knows how to build a team around him. The Mavericks, of course, got to the finals, but they went through a lot of changes mid-season in order to get that roster together. But it happened to work. Right now, the Lakers are facing the same scenario because his 10-year Supermax is coming up. He can opt out early in 2028 and sign for that 10-year Supermax number, which will earn him well over $80 million a season.
I thought it was really interesting that earlier when you talked about why you sold, you said, look, to own a team now, the best way to maximize value is the real estate.
Yeah.
You have to have, like, whether it's a shopping plaza, you look at the Battery in Atlanta, hotels. I mean, I'm from Boston. I always think of Patriot Place, which was years and years ago before this became a trend. But it's a giant mall, and there's bowling and
Yeah, we had
restaurants and
Victory
bars.
Plaza at the American Airlines Center, and it did okay, but that's not the business I wanted to be in. The best part about owning the Mavs was I could go out in the court and shoot before a game, and when there was a buzzer beater, I can run on the court and not get arrested. But the emotional connection of it is intense. The anxiety levels, the mental health levels are intense. And so, it was draining, and I just thought, like, okay, it's time. I didn't want to have to worry about, building whatever. I didn't want to have to worry about private equity coming in, and the conversations in the Board of Governors moved from, okay, how do we make it better for fans? Not that they don't care about fans, but just the conversation in the Board of Governors meetings was all about valuations.
And that right there is a complete different conversation. And also going back to what he said, I just didn't want to get into building whatever. NBA teams today on the billionaire level has moved into a different asset class, just owning it. And with the current media landscape today just being so consolidated, the money is kind of scarce. So these owners are looking at these teams now like a real estate play. We're going to get these stadiums perhaps a little bit outside of the cities where it's less dense. And we're going to build resorts, hotels. We're going to have the casinos. That's where the gambling comes in. Everything is going to be all in the same ecosystem. Just like how the Golden State Warriors have it down there at Chase Center. Just having access to make money off of commercial real estate, the farmers market, fine dining. A lot of these new NBA owners that are coming in today, this is the end goal that they have in mind. That's why private equity is coming in and help fund some of these owners to acquire these teams. The NBA right now is definitely in different times, and that's why the conversations of evaluations keep coming up over fan experience. It's almost like it's a blind spot because in a way, fans today have way more options, especially younger generations, on what can keep them entertained. They got individual streamers, a bunch of different YouTube channels. They got other platforms. They can go live themselves. Shit, we not even factor in Grand Theft Auto 6 when that comes out. That's going to be a whole universe of just different silos keeping people entertained. Private equity better be careful because they got to understand pimping out fan loyalty. There is going to be a breaking point, and that loyalty is not a guarantee going into the future.
I mean, when I bought the Mavs, I paid $285 million. 10 years later, the NBA could not sell the Charlotte or the New Orleans team to anybody. It had to take over the New Orleans team, and the valuations 10 years later were still 280 some whatever million dollars. And I didn't care about the valuation. We went through the great financial crisis and everything sucked. People didn't have money. I wasn't worried about that. I cared about winning, and then we got to the point where franchises got so expensive, it was almost always, some level of private equity involvement. And when you're having to bring in money, you're obligated to those people. And when you have obligations because you're raising money, it's not just about winning. Because all those people you brought in, particularly the private equity guys, they don't want to write checks for capital calls because you went into the luxury tax or you were above the second apron.
AKA, they don't give a fuck about winning. And we're already seeing it. Once again, Luka has been on the Lakers for 2 seasons in his prime, coming off of an NBA Finals appearance, and there's no rush to put some major pieces around him. We've never seen this from the Laker organization before. They normally have that winning mindset, that standard that was set by Dr. Buss. But now with new ownership, don't be shocked if that's just something of the past.
You know, that's not why they're there. They're not running on the court on a buzzer beater. You know, they're not, you know, they might get, you know, free beers and a chance to get some balls signed for their kids, you know, or maybe they get pictures, you know, and they can bring their kids in the back. You know, it just became a different beast, and it wasn't near as much fun.
Now, see, what's interesting to me is you have guys buying teams who they can't afford it themselves, and that's okay. Bill Chisholm, Celtics, $6 billion, they're approved initially, and then they go out and get the money. And as you alluded to, there's not many places to look other than private equity. And they're in it for the turnaround, and the valuations are hockey sticking like crazy. Right after the Celtics $6 billion, you had the Lakers at a $10 billion valuation to Mark Walter. So now as you look in the next 10 years, you got to think PE is almost always going to be involved. And, you know, I don't mean it to be like a Pollyannish question, but is something lost now in owning a team? Because as you said, you loved it for owning the team.
It's totally different. Yeah, it's totally different. You know, I remember when I came in and I was the young guy, and all the old school owners just hated my ass. Hated. There was one guy, the guy who owned the Pistons, I think it was, and I'd gotten fined already a couple of times. I hadn't even owned the team 6 months. And he stood up in a board meeting. No, I stood up at the board meeting, and he was, shut your motherfucking ass up until you have done something in this league. And then I started to respond to him, and I called him by the wrong name, and David Stern had to step in. But it was just a different vibe. And then as those guys got out, you know, then people came in and they were more like me, right? They loved the game. You know, they played some, even if they just liked it, right? They played some, and they were more vocal, more connected to the players. And now it's PE guys.
Ooh, that's the worst. That is the worst. They just look at the teams, and even the fan loyalty is just an asset. No emotional ties. And Mark Cuban right here elaborating on how he changed the standard of the relationship an owner had with his team. There was an organic passion, sort of a fan appeal that he had. A lot of these new owners coming in, that connection is not there. That's why tanking this season especially has been a major issue, because they're basically reading it off a spreadsheet. They're seeing the benefits of tanking. You get to select a star in the lottery and get him for cheap for 7 seasons. Also, you could participate in luxury tax payments from other teams, while at the same time you keep your costs low, because, you know, you just basically have a bunch of minimum players or just young players who just got into the league. But that same disconnect that they have just looking at all the benefits is how young players who they just drafted are being affected by the tanking. They're getting a little bit too comfortable, building bad habits, and coaches have to end up doing their jobs different because they have to lose games on purpose. Where's the reps in order to be successful? It's just not going to happen overnight.
And it's run much more like a business than it is as a passion. And that doesn't apply to everybody. There are certainly exceptions, but yeah, it just changed completely. And, you know, I sold at the end of 23, but I literally had written an email to Adam Silver in October of 22 saying this is what I'm going to do, and gave him these exact reasons.
We had Mark Lazary in here, who you know, he was in that
course.
seat. And I asked him about selling his stake in the Bucks and just how much of it was about Giannis, which he alluded to a little bit. Now, he, like you, said it was time. But I also wonder to what
He
extent
was only there
you thought
5 years,
about,
yeah.
Well, that's right. I mean,
And he's a prime example of the kind of owners that are coming into the league. They barely have a connection with the team. They just really look at it from a transaction standpoint. Giannis's contract was coming up. They did not want to dip into the luxury tax, and they end up selling it to, I believe, one of the Cleveland Brown owners. Matter of fact, let's listen directly as we hear from Mark Lazary speak on how now he's on the investment side of the business, and just look at his point of view, and even the way the woman asked the question about NBA teams mostly having their value in the real estate. And also, Lazary touched base on pimping out that fan loyalty, raising ticket prices because fans year in, year out are loyal.
What you think that like the froth is done at some point? I'm just trying to understand how you can suck more value out of something that doesn't have the real estate yet. Like how do you how do you get more value from them?
Well, I think the way you'll get more value, look, you only make money in sports 3 ways. So it's ticket sales, sponsorship, and media. So if the Celtics win again, they'll be able to raise ticket prices anywhere between 10 to 20%. If you have a team that's the worst in the league, that team is still raising prices 5, 10%. Nobody stops giving up on their team. It's actually one of the great little secrets about pro sports. Every year, the whole mantra in sports is next year is our year, right? And everybody believes that.
So right there, you're hearing it directly from the source. The real estate play is the major appeal of why all this Saudi money, private equity is coming into the league. And they're definitely looking to pimp out that fan loyalty. But right here, we're going to continue hearing from Mark Cuban elaborate on that real estate play.
Dallas is one of the fastest growing cities in the country. If you want to do a casino and if you want to build and you're into real estate, there's no better city. And so it made perfect sense. Fans know it's not always going to go your way. Fans know there's going to be seasons that you thought were going to be good that turn out bad and vice versa. But if you're sharing in the misery as an owner and you're telling them you're going to do what you're going to do, right? And how you see it, that's beautiful for fans. I mean, that is the way every owner should communicate with fans. There is no business without your fans. And I said it from day one when I bought the Mavs. I don't own the team. I'm just the steward of the team. The fans own the team. If they don't show up, we're done. If they're not fans, we're done. If they don't want to watch, we're done. If families aren't Mavs families, we're done. And you can't just accept that that's going to continue. You have to get out there and connect to them. You always saw me take pictures, always. You always saw me sign autographs, always. Never an exception, simply because those are my customers. And I don't think we treat them as customers.
And right away, Laker fans are seeing this in real time. Their ticket prices going from one season to the next, in some sections, is up by almost 45%. And never before that season ticket holders had to deal with a 3% admin fee. But this really shouldn't come by no surprise. It's going to be the new norm with this type of institutional money taking over.
Well, so the irony is, I imagine they're betting that the imprimatur of the NBA is part of the value.
Of course it is.
You're in bed with the ultimate.
Of course it is. And there's true value there, right? But part of it is all that money is just supposed to go right to the owners, right? This is just an equity valuation play for the owners. And the smart, I would have been all for it. There's no downside as an owner. But at the same time, you have to look at the fan bases. And, I'm sure the NBA does their studies, their research and all that. Adam's not stupid. Mark Tatum's not stupid. Bill Koenig's not stupid. They know their shit, right? But at the same time, I can't even, as, what's the right, not vociferous, but just as committed as fans are to their teams in Europe and the clubs that they've grown up with, they're still more loyal to a team, where here fans have evolved to be more loyal to a player, right? I grew up a Pittsburgh fan of everything. If I wasn't, my dad would disown me. Even when the Steelers always suck. SOS, same old Steelers. We are the Steelers, right? My buddies were up watching the Penguins late. I just went to a meeting and somebody from Pittsburgh, I was up late watching the Penguins lose to the Flyers. That's Pittsburgh. And that reflects, that's just like Europe, Chicago, Pittsburgh. That's the way they look at teams. And walking into that set of circumstances thinking just because you're the NBA, I think that arrogance will backfire.
It's crazy because out of all the sports, the NBA happens to be that kind of league where a lot of the fan bases, especially the younger demo that these corporations want to attract, they do love the individual player over these teams. They kind of follow just that one guy. There's Laker fans and there's Kobe fans. There's people who love LeBron no matter where he goes, etc., etc. And when you combine that with an audience that has a plethora of streaming options and just ways to keep them entertained, you wonder how things will look like going forward. But adding on to all that, we're now going to hear Mark Cuban talk about streaming, as the tech companies have a different goal in mind that does not include ratings, but their ambitions in streaming doesn't necessarily help the NBA long term.
But is there a point at which the market becomes oversaturated? I mean, how much new basketball can the world support?
It's not so much about how much new basketball, it's about revenue streams. Because right now, sports is doing really, really well on all medias, right? Streaming, it's killing it. But the unknown parameter, the unknown KPI, if you will, is retention, is subscription retention. I think what broke the bank for everybody and was a blessing to all sports teams was when Peacock spent $100 million on the NFL and got one game and got 3 million subscribers and retained all of them. That became the benchmark. And they went out and spent $2.6 billion with the NBA. And, now that they've got about 9% churn, I don't know what the number is that says above this number, it's not good, or below this number, it's fine. But it's not about ratings anymore. We like to cover, you guys love to talk about ratings. Ratings are irrelevant. It's subscriptions and churn. Do you create new subscriptions? Because that's the money. Yes, they sell ads, and yes, they want to sell more, but that's not the primary source of revenue.
But also at the same time, that only serves the tech companies. What's the measurement for Adam Silver in the league to figure out if their audience is growing or just being sustained? That's why a lot of the NBA owners are making the real estate play with these stadiums. They are somewhat anticipating in the future the media side of the revenue going down, and they're going to make that up by having the casino in the same area as the arena, a hotel, fine dining, restaurants, shopping, even apartment buildings. I believe there's an MLB team in Atlanta or in Charlotte. They have a set of apartment buildings. Definitely be on the lookout for some of your favorite teams to be leaving your local downtown area and going out into the suburbs.
I don't know what the number is that says above this number, it's not good, or below this number, it's fine. But it's not about ratings anymore. We like to cover, you guys love to talk about ratings. Ratings are irrelevant. It's subscriptions and churn. Do you create new subscriptions? Because that's the money. Yes, they sell ads, and yes, they want to sell more, but that's not the primary source of revenue.
Now, not everything has the sticking power of NFL and getting one NFL game.
Even the NFL, right? I mean, they have got to, every professional sports, any league that makes their money from TV, quote unquote, right, whether it's streaming or linear, understands that linear TV is dying and is becoming completely dependent on sports, and so when you have 60-70% of whatever it is of your revenue coming from basically one industry, we would give you shit on Shark Tank. And so that has to be a concern, and everybody looks to that and says, well, we can hopefully get a real TV deal / streaming deal and generate revenue there, or we can sell subscriptions. But I can tell you, when you look at the individual team subscriptions, local subscriptions for NBA teams, they ain't all that, And so there's still a lot of risk associated with what's going on.
Dying, but not dead yet, as I like to say. I mean, we're living through the transition period.
Yeah, that whole thing when streaming started 30 years ago, and we said that, this is what was going to happen, just took a little longer than we expected. But it's still completely dependent, other than maybe Amazon, on subscriptions.
And that's going to present a major problem for not just the NBA, the other sports leagues also going into the future. We see Netflix already hit that saturation point when it comes to subscriptions. And today they're more focused on building out an advertising model within their platform.
And you've got Netflix going to event-driven sports, and that works for them, but their numbers aren't going through the roof. Have they reached a ceiling where you can do event-driven or a couple games or Christmas Day? I don't know. But the idea of the ratings are up, the ratings are down, meaningless numbers. I mean, that helps advertising sales on the margin, but it's all about subscription revenue, because that is what pays the bills. When Netflix reports their earnings, they talk about ad revenue, but how many subscribers do you have locally or globally? When, NBC Peacock reports, how many subscribers do you have? Disney, how many subscribers do you have? They don't look at the average ratings anymore at all.
It's funny, when you look around at the upstart leagues, as I said, so many of them have attempted to harness that trend. TGL, Unrivaled, all these younger leagues that what they've done right is they're short, it seems to me. they've handled, you say ratings are relevant. Well, we're still going to talk about them, right? And the big leagues have a problem, and that is the regular season is so long. They're all doing stuff to try and make it interesting.
I don't think it's so long. I don't think it's so long.
Well,
right? I really don't. And, TGL and Unrivaled, that's great. It's made for TV, and they kept it short because they wanted to keep their salaries lower, and they wanted to fit in gaps, right?
and appointment viewing.
And there's no such thing as appointment viewing, right? Well, I take that back. They're for specific sports teams, if you really like them, or a sport, if you really love it, then you'll make the time to go there. But I mean, I don't know if those leagues made money. I have no idea. Not yet. And so it's not going to be easy. It really is not.
Cuban is right. Some of those leagues didn't really make any money. And also, just examining the way the NBA kind of built their league around that 82 game schedule, it fit for television broadcasting, which at the time, the governments were involved on who can get certain slots, what could actually be shown, etc., etc. So the NFL, the NBA, a lot of these sports leagues that have been around for well over 80 years, the scheduling was really made for that kind of format. But under streaming, those long schedules have no impact on these platforms. I had seen one time a Facebook executive had made a comment about them showing a live MLB game on the platform, and he said it basically has zero impact. So once again, these tech platforms are examining these leagues a lot different and seeing how they could fit within their ecosystem. Netflix is sitting on a bunch of cash, but they want event-driven games, the must-haves. This is a complete different relationship than what the sports leagues were used to having with just broadcasters.
And so, it's worth trying, and there's an opportunity there, but I don't think it's the length of the season. I think it's the length of the games. Because when you look at the amount of time played in a game, like the NFL's 15 minutes of playing time.
People love to cite that stat, I know.
And it's real, right? And it's the lowest, it has the least amount of actual playing time of any professional sport.
Makes it higher stakes every play.
No, it means you can go to the bathroom, you can check your email, you have time to play fantasy football, right? You can do everything else. You don't have to commit brain time or attention time for more than 15 minutes. That's critical, because that's the problem with the NHL. So if you think about it, Major League Baseball sped up their game. The ratings popped up some. It's still slow, but they sped it up. It got better. People got excited.
That's another interesting thing about streaming or just anything involving these tech platforms. Human nature stands out a lot more within these ecosystems. In a way, it's almost like we're watching these leagues trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. Like the puzzle piece just doesn't fit under streaming. The only reason they're there is because the tech platforms are sitting on a lot of cash and they're still under the audience acquisition phase. All the streaming services like Peacock, Netflix, Hulu, Disney, ESPN Plus, even Apple and YouTube TV, all these services are still in the audience acquisition phase. And the money going into the future is not a guarantee. We know there's going to be a ceiling when it comes to that subscriber count.
Even with the AI umpires now, right? What do they call APB? I forget what they...
ABS,
right? APB. Other than that, even though it slowed it down a little bit, it sped up the game. And then if you look at the lowest ratings, straight 60 minutes of time, hockey, MLS, right? And I really think if the NBA went from 48 minutes to 40 minutes, it would change it 180 degrees for the better. College basketball, no one says, oh, damn, these games are only 48 minutes. Boy, that Final Four would have been so much better if this game was 48 minutes. Nobody says it about the WNBA. Nobody says it about any league, anywhere in the world. No one looked at the Olympics and said, damn, the dream team would have been a dream if they played 48 minutes. But if those games are 40 minutes, now all of a sudden, you don't have to concentrate so much. The game gets compressed enough where there's more action and more, it's not so much every game's important, but every possession becomes more important. Then all of a sudden, we've all seen the games when 36 minutes in, the worst team, is winning, and you think the better team's going to come back. 40 minutes, you're going to run out of time. So you'll see a lot more upsets. Teams will have to come up with different strategies. So I'm a firm believer, and Adam brought it up, but I'm a firm believer in 40 minutes. And I used to tell that to the NBA, the shorter the amount of playing time, the better the response.
Oh, for sure. These leagues will definitely adapt, and it will be because of the audience, not because they care about historical records or pretend to. We see with the 65 game rule and the way certain guys can't make all NBA teams and win certain awards, they never really cared about the historical stats, especially if the money is right. But MLB introducing the pitch clock is one of the prime examples of how these leagues will eventually change depending on the audience, because that's what it's all about. They got to maintain an audience, especially a younger generation coming in and talking about the game, eventually passing it down to their kids. But Mark Cuban also elaborated on expansion, and he gave great insight to even how that interaction with NBA owners is different because of private equity.
Like, I remember when Charlotte came into the league, and I remember having a conversation with some owners that I won't name, and I was like, you realize that this is just a loan and they're getting the team for free. And they were like, no, Mark, we're getting $300 million, right? That's a little, because there are 29 teams, so that's a little bit more than 10 million each. I'm like, no, but we went from 1/29th of all the money to 1/30th of the money. And that delta is what, they're using to recapture everything they put up. And the same applies now. And with the TV deal being a lot bigger, the numbers have to be a lot bigger. And it's still just a loan, but it's a 60-year loan. And it's a way, in a world where the teams have so heavily geared towards private equity, again, not all teams, it's a way for them to get money out sooner. And it's the same with NBA Europe, right? It's just a way to monetize. And that's what that's the gearing towards it. And I feel bad for Adam because it's a much harder job.
Yeah, with this changing landscape, it's definitely a much harder job for Adam Silver, because even for these new owners to borrow money, the interest rate is a lot higher than in previous years. That's why all the Saudi and private equity money is coming in. But those entities have their own ambitions, and the interactions with the league is going to be a lot different on all levels, including for us fans. Wow, we'd even factor in sports gambling. That's a whole nother monster on its own. But Mark Cuban elaborated on just the leagues now accepting sports gambling and how integrated it is.
What do you think about the overall embrace of legal sports betting by all the leagues?
Sports betting is not the problem, whether it's Kalshi or traditional sports betting. It's the prop bets that are the problem. I don't think we fully considered all the permutations of betting that would be created and the simplicity of betting online. Because when the original conversations, you could discuss, online poker, and it was dead. It had gone like this, and then they outlawed it for the most part. And then it was still going to a sports book. And going to a sports book, there's some limitations, right? But then when it went all online and the, daily fantasy sports kind of boosted it up, then it was like, okay, but daily fantasy sports isn't necessarily a problem. Betting on wins and losses, end of quarter scores isn't a problem. But, now when you're betting, does a guy pick his nose at the free throw line with under 6 minutes up by more than 12? That creates a lot of perverse incentives. And I think that's created a problem. And I think that's one of the reasons, obviously I wasn't involved with Kalshi, the NBA and other leagues doing deals with the prediction markets, simply because they want, it's not because so much about their money or the data feeds, it's more because they want to limit the types of predictions or bets.
Partner with them because then we have more control over
exactly
keeping things we don't like off the platform.
We'll let you keep on doing it if you limit the types of bets.
Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of the prop bets got a few NBA players, past and present, caught up. Matter of fact, it's been such a rough start. I'll just say this. Giannis would have been in Miami sooner had it not been for that Terry Rozier case. The NBA had did an investigation before Terry Rozier was even traded to Miami, and they gave a first-round pick in order to acquire him, and they took on his salary. So both those things should have never happened. Matter of fact, the Heat even put up a case to get the trade revoked. Adam Silver definitely has a lot on his hands, but overall, this was a great insight into how a lot of the business has changed throughout the years. And for us fans, the interaction with the league is going to be a lot different.